everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us to participate. We're very happy to be here and have the opportunity to talk with you about principles for building global diversity programs. Before we dive in, we wanted to take a few moments to introduce ourselves. So I'm Lauren Jackman, and I am the director of Medallia's Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging practice. And I'm joining you today from Oakland, California, where I live with my husband and our little dog, Penny. I am a researcher by training. So before joining Medallia, I finished my PhD program in social psychology at Stanford. And I've been with Medallia since 2014. And what I really try to do is bring an evidence-based, data-driven, and human-centered approach to all of our programs. And I'm very fortunate to have wonderful partners across the company, including Caro Bell, who I'll let introduce herself now.
Thanks, Lauren. It is wonderful to work with you too. I'm Caro Bell. I'm an HR business partner and the regional lead for our diversity and inclusion practices. I'm joining you today from Buenos Aires, where I live with my husband. I'm a lawyer and I have a master's degree in organizational coaching. I joined Medallia 7 years ago as my first HR experience. So I was lucky enough to always work with people that inspired me and gave me the space to grow according to my personal interest. And really, I'm very grateful for the people I work with during these years.
All right, so we'll begin with a bit of history and context around our journey so far. I founded our diversity, inclusion, and belonging practice in 2016. So this is not a new area of focus for Medallia. But in that time, we've had to think a lot about how to reinvent our programs, in particular at scale. And so we went from being around 500 or 600 people to now being over 1,800 employees in over 17 countries worldwide. And my team, as a team of 3 people, faces a big challenge in thinking about, how we can meet our global needs.
Since 2017, I lead the regional efforts of diversity and belonging and inclusion practices. We were growing at a very fast pace in Argentina, and we thought that was the right timing to start a local team that would focus on the country biases, but also on the tech industry specific ones. Since then, I've been leading the programs in the region and working very closely with Lauren.
All right, so in this talk, we're going to share 3 principles that we have identified on our journey so far.
We believe that in order to truly make a progress, companies must prioritize diversity and inclusion globally. In this talk, we will review 3 important principles for building effective and meaningful programs that engage employees and make an impact across regions. The 3 principles we have identified after some years of working on this are setting local meaningful goals to create accountability, encourage global engagement with your communities, and last but not least, always leaders set the tone. So let's dive into this one. So the first principle is set locally meaningful goals and create accountability. So as I said, the first principle is set goals that are meaningful for your ecosystem, industry, and country. And that will give you the possibility to create accountability mechanisms. But why is it so important to do this? Well, because you can't apply goals based on market data from other regions to be successful. So if you want to get meaningful goals that are relevant to your region and to your regional offices, begin by listening and learning. Listening to our employees about what the inclusion needs are and what the areas of focus should be is key. As an example, we started our diversity practices after a Voice of Medallia survey and a connection that, by chance, a female employee made with Lauren in Palo Alto. Then, when you listen, you will be able to have a proper dialogue and provide the appropriate training pieces. So for 3 years, we had a consistent cadence of live trainings on diversity and inclusion topics that both Lauren and I facilitated in Spanish and in English. But learning doesn't always mean to have the typical training. Today, we have different shapes of learning opportunities that goes from town halls, summer sessions, different opportunities to connect people across regions, etc. So the learning piece of collecting data about your local talent market in order to set meaningful goals is key to create accountability. Back in 2017, we were struggling a lot with defining our hiring goals. As we didn't know the market in terms of women in tech properly, and the only research we had was not exactly what we were looking for, we took that as an opportunity to have an impact in our tech community, but also in our country. We supported conducting some research with Chicas en Tecnología or Women in Tech, and today we have data that is available for everybody. So we wanted to have that data for Medallia, but we also wanted to give back to the community, so we make all the results of that research available for everyone. That research shows that 16% of new enrollments in 2015 were women. So we used that research to set the 16 target for Medallia Argentina in hiring. So having an achievable goal makes it easier to create accountability in all areas. So when you're talking to your recruiting team, you can have a different conversation than let's find all the talent. When you have a conversation with hiring managers and you can tell, okay, is this team reflective of the market? Yes or no? And you have data that will allow you to foster those conversations. And when you think from an HR perspective, your benefit programs, the policies that you need, etc. And the great news about setting clear targets and giving accountability is that you can share progress.
So the other important piece to think about once you have those locally meaningful targets, you've done your listening and learning, is to really think about what is the accountability mechanism. So how are you reporting against how you're doing for these targets? And so we've spent a lot of time really making sure that we understand what our pipeline looks like, and then putting those numbers in front of our hiring managers, in front of our talent acquisition team. So we use the Rooney Rule, which is a way of ensuring representation at a given stage of your funnel. So we're thinking often about the top of the funnel, and how do we make sure that we have a good mix of candidates in the top of the funnel. So we use the Rooney Rule to make sure that representation is there, and we're getting our teams used to the process of reporting out on that on a monthly basis. So everybody's used to seeing the same information, and we can start to have a sense of what are the important levers that we can use if we're not getting that representation? How can we deal with it? What can we do then? And so having a way to report back to the business and drive that accountability toward your targets is key. All right, so the next principle that we're going to talk about is encouraging global engagement with your communities. And when I say communities, I'm speaking about our employee resource groups, or we sometimes call them ERGs. And these are volunteer-led organizations that are focused on enriching our environment by offering opportunities for professional development, opportunities to give back or for philanthropy, and also leading cultural celebrations, bringing people together. So each of our communities, we have 9 of them at Medallia, has always been encouraged to think globally. You know, we've always said, hey, make sure to, connect with your peers, make sure to offer things at globally friendly times. But what we have observed over the years is that's certainly easier said than done, especially when you're working with volunteers who have their own full-time jobs. It can be really difficult to get people to focus on building those connections and to really think globally when they're thinking about their programming for the year. And so one thing, some of it is low-hanging fruit. You can explicitly encourage global participation in your communities, and even that we've seen to already make an impact. But we do have a couple of tips that we want to share here, things that have really accelerated our global connections. So one tip that we have is around creating structure and centralized channels for information sharing. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what I mean by this. One that I see that I have pictured here on the slide is our ERG toolkit. And that's a resource created by my team. And it's designed to really share information with our employees about how communities are formed, what kind of support they can expect from the diversity team, what kind of guidelines we offer around programming. And it's really helped to level the playing field in terms of access to information and clarity about how to get approval for resources. Another example of centralized communication channel is our diversity newsletter, which we now put out monthly and features inclusion efforts worldwide. So it's highlighting different speakers and events that we have in different locations, as well as things that might just be available locally, like different apps and things in different languages. And so we're really trying to drive visibility to our inclusion efforts across regions and create a sense of shared focus there. And then the last example that I'll share is our centralized ERG, which we call Medallia Medley. And Medallia Medley is a group composed of each of our ERG leaders, as well as our regional leaders who are focused on diversity in their local context. And what this forum does is it provides a monthly opportunity for everybody who has a shared goal around creating diversity and inclusion in the company to come together, share information, ask questions, and identify opportunities to partner up.
Another tip would be highlight regional leaders and connectors. When we started the local practice in Argentina, I had a formal time dedicated to Lauren's team, and we really had to move the needle in having a shared understanding of what this practice meant across Medallia and across different regions. But that doesn't always need to be the approach. Lauren did a great job highlighting what the team I led was doing, and I think during the last year, we are making meaningful progress on highlighting our connectors to the global ERGs. So our recommendation would be to focus on empowering regional leaders, those who have passion and interest to advance the diversity conversation in the regions, and your connectors. Connectors would be anyone who might work cross-functional across regions, or have moved from one region to another, or has a good sense of challenges and or needs that each region has. So looking for opportunities to showcase those individuals is great.
So excited to share one example of how we've done this with you all, which is what we call Women's History Month in the US. We've traditionally observed as Women's Rights Week in Argentina. And the decision to use a different name was focused, it came out of that listening process that we talked about in the last principle, right? Making sure you understand the local context and what's going to resonate with folks. So we found that Women's Rights Week resonated more with our team in Argentina, and it felt more relevant to their cultural context. So what happened this year was that Women's Rights Week instead became a global effort, which highlighted our women in tech community as well as our Argentina diversity team.
Yes, and this event that Lauren is referring to had different topics. So the topics were mostly technical, but also provided space to non-technical ones that have focused on gender equality. We had 16 tech talks across Medallia. We had more than 600 attendees. All the speakers were women across our main engineering offices, which allowed the event to feature new voices. So every time we want to dream about the Women's Rights Week, we start with the question about what would be the dream event look like. And this year, the event was to be global, to have tech talks, to be able to give other people new possibilities to speak in front of the entire company. And we heard great feedback from our engineer leaders, like, this is one of the best planned and executed activities we have ever had in engineering.
Awesome. So I'll share the last tip around this principle now, which is to look for the silver linings. So, this year has been really challenging. None of us really expected to be having a pivot to everybody working from home. And my team heard a lot of concerns around what would be the impact to our communities. Before COVID, many many of our communities focused on in-person events like happy hours and conferences and organizing, celebratory lunches. And so, this was a real concern for our communities. But what we've seen is actually that the shift to being fully remote has really opened up opportunities in terms of inclusive programming. So it flipped the norm from having in-person events with an option for remote folks to join to having instead remote being the primary way that everyone's engaging. And what that has meant is much more participation across regions, including for conferences and other events, which now can be attended virtually by all team members. And so I want to share one example of really seeing disruption to kind of normal programming and really using it as an opportunity to innovate. So one of our communities, Qfield, which is our LGBTQ plus community, has run an annual talent show for several years. And they would often hold talent shows in each region, and the acts would be performed live in that region. And then a recording would be shared to allow our global teams to participate and to appreciate the talent that was shared. However, what we saw this year with COVID was that Qfield was able to pivot to a truly global talent show. And what they did was have the acts pre-recorded, much like these talks are pre-recorded. And the event was then live streamed on Twitch with hosts. And it still created an opportunity for everybody to have the shared experience of watching the acts together. But the simple change to having them pre-recorded opened up lots of different possibilities. So we saw new types of acts that were performed that might not have been easy to do live. So things like a cartoonist drawing freehand, a DJ set, athletes who were doing tricks related to their sport. And we also saw really interesting and powerful collaborations, including people across regions who collaborated together on a musical number. And so seeing these kinds of innovation was just really powerful for our community. And the lesson that we've extracted from that is, sometimes things that seem like setbacks and challenges can really be opportunities to advance inclusion. And then, to talk a little bit about the last principle, which is that leaders set the tone. We've seen this firsthand, that having a strong leadership voice on diversity initiatives can really be a catalyst to have every team and every region make diversity a priority. So this year, we communicated goals around improving racial and ethnic diversity in the US. And what we did was not communicate those goals just to the US team, and we also didn't communicate them in a vacuum. Instead, we communicated them globally, and we connected them to a broader goal and our company values. So the broader goal was the intention to have Medallia be a reflection of the society in all the countries where we operate. And that means, you can easily follow that principle and understand that, okay, we need to look at the demographics in each of the countries where we're operating, and we need to understand where we have gaps and where we have opportunities to ensure that we're representing the diversity of the world around us.
Yes, and locally, this means that in Argentina, we are looking to improve our women's in tech roles representation. When we started this initiative, we had 6% of women in technical roles. Today, we have 13% of our engineers that are women. So with the leaders' commitments and the effort of the local team and the support from Lauren and the PNC team, we were able to grow more than 100% in our female representation. We also made our company more friendly to women because we learned how to do that. So also we have been raising the bar on our targets in terms of our internship program. So back in 2018, we said we wanted to have at least 16% of representation, of women's representation, and we had 36% of women representation in that class. Back in 2019, we said we wanted to have at least 40% of representation, and we achieved 46% of women's representation. And this year, we said we wanted to have at least 60% of representation, and we have a very promising final candidates and we feel confident about hitting that target. And we know that we would like to have more representation across different levels at Medallia, but this is still an area of focus. So in conclusion, we hope you apply these 3 principles to help encourage global thinking around diversity. We would recommend you to be patient because it takes time. But if you highlight your wins and also have fun in the process, it's great to see how much you can personally and professionally grow by doing this. Thank you.
Hey, Lauren. Hey, Caro. It has been a long time since the last time we saw each other. How are you doing?
Doing fine. Should we use our camera? Yeah, okay.
Hey, there you are.
Nice to see you, Juli.
Hi.
Super interesting talk. Thank you so much for joining Nerdearla. I was just to say Medallia.
Medallia.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of minutes to share some of the questions that people shared. And the first one is, at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned that you listen to your employees and all the perspectives. How do you encourage those spaces in the organization to speak up, considering that people from these groups have always been afraid to talk and ask and say what they feel?
Cara, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think that we were discussing, like we had some ideas. Like one thing that I can recall on how we start doing that is starting by educating everybody in terms of unconscious bias and also how to speak up, so that people, well, can see that everybody sometimes has doubts or doesn't know what to say or how to revert an action that was not the best idea. And I think that the speak up culture training is one tool that helps us digest different scenarios that were occurring in our office and also learn how to deal with that so that we don't need to escalate things and have trusted conversation between people that work at Medallia and in life, right? It's like how we build trust like this. So I think that is one of the key things, no? How we build trust and we are feeling comfortable talking about the things that sometimes is weird even in real life to discuss, but in a working environment, I think that is super important to set the tone that way.
I completely agree. Certainly our speaking up training and just kind of normalizing that sometimes, you know, these things happen and it's important, you know, to feel that you can speak up and also to know that you're going to be listened to. So I think for majority group members, for people in positions of authority, you have an opportunity to build trust by really demonstrating that it is okay. When somebody does speak up, showing them that you're going to listen, you're not going to be dismissive, that you're going to really take it to heart. And the other thing I would note is having really good, really clear policies on what to do if something happens at work that's really not okay. And that helps employees know that no matter what the situation is, you've thought through what your position is as an organization and what the consequences are. So definitely think that's very important.
Yeah, super important point to understand that it's not the same to do A or B. So going to the next question, how do you approach making an inclusive hiring process? Do you tailor the hiring pipeline to different groups, as for example, gender? How do you do it?
Great question. This is something that we think about a lot in my team. I think it's really important that everybody have a consistent interview process. So we don't try to tailor the process based on anybody's particular social identities, but what we try to do is think about all the different social identities that somebody might have and how that might impact the way they experience interviewing at Medallia. So for example, if you have a very homogenous panel of interviewers, somebody who's different than them might, experience that as less than a great experience. And so what we try to do is have more diversity amongst our interviewers, not only for those individuals, right, who are coming from an underrepresented background, but actually for everybody, because we think it's really important to send that message. So you have lots of opportunities to think about how to build inclusion. It could be everything from, asking how somebody wants to connect with you versus assuming that it will be a phone call. So we think about disability and accessibility, providing different channels for candidates to connect is one important thing. Asking for people to share the pronouns that they use would be another way. And then making sure that all of your interviewers are trained on how to be respectful, how not to show bias. So I think you can embed inclusion into the process, and really the best way to do it is to make sure that it's impacting the experience of every single candidate the same way.
Yeah, completely agree. I think we have time for a last question. So let's go for it. And this is not the question, sorry, here it is. It's not simple to manage all these channels, So have you used some behavioral design methodology to promote diversity?
I love this question. This is like a psychology question. So yes, I think there are lots of little ways that I'm thinking about, behavioral techniques to try to incentivize the kinds of behaviors that you want to see and to discourage the kinds of behaviors that you don't want to see. I don't know that it's quite, like a full behavior change model, like any one model that we're borrowing, but things that come to mind, like, for example, if you want to promote the behavior of managers being really thoughtful when they're giving performance reviews, and you want them to be thinking about how bias might be influencing their reviews, you have to think about the cognitive load balance that's happening there. And so providing reminders about how bias works and how to be sure and consider the entire review period and examples of different cognitive biases that might be coming up right before they go into reviews is a really important way to remind them, like, this is not just important in general, but it's for this particular exercise. Other little examples of things that come to mind, like we have our Slack channels. That's one of the main ways that we communicate. And sometimes teams are trying to train like not using a certain word anymore. Like within our IT organization, I know they've been trying to change the words like master and slave and also blacklist. And so you can set Slackbot reminders. So when people start using kind of ingrained language patterns, they just get a quick reminder that's automated that's like, maybe there's probably a better word to use here. So yes, lots of little ways those kinds of principles are embedded in our work.
Right. So is there anything else you would like to share with all the people that are probably listening you really, really mindfully? Something you want to share with us before saying goodbye, and thank you so much for joining?
I think I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joined, and thanks for thinking about building global inclusion programs. It's super important. And wishing you all lots of luck, and I hope that these tips were.
Yeah, same thing. I think that this talk also gave us the opportunity to reflect deeply on what are the things that we have been doing, and what are the things that you do on a daily basis and you don't even realize until you need to put like in paper everything that you are doing, or the principles that you are following. That is great to see, and I think that is this is worth it. I mean, it's something that makes the difference to be in a company that really cares about this deeply, and for us as humans that participate in, that are spending our time in these companies, it's important to be able to give back in that way too. Thank you so much for inviting us, and it's great to see you, Uli, and everybody.
Great to see you too, and congratulations for the culture you have known how to build. So thank you so much. Hope to see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.